Just want to say thank you for joining me in this. And I think it's working okay to kind of do video introductions to things and video epilogues and this kind of thing. But today, again, I'm here to kind of introduce something, but I wanted to start from kind of a quarter turn. A lot of new subscribers, a lot of new followers, and thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad that the work resonates with you. I'm very happy when you leave comments, when you share, and, along with the sharing of some quote or the whole piece, you say what it means to you or that you have experienced the same thing. I love it. It makes me feel not only seen, but, that there is someone else in the world who is experiencing these things. And so it means a lot to me. With that in mind, I don't want to kind of say but and then negate that whole thing, but, and please don't take this the wrong way, the AutSide and Sensual Residue, they're not content. They're not, okay, Jamie, what are we going to write about? And here's the thing, I think we'll get a lot of clicks. That's not what this is. The AutSide has never been that. As a gestalt processor who has extreme support needs around language, and when somebody asks a question, I didn't always have a proper response. I'm not quick, I'm not witty, these kinds of things. And so as I've gotten older and I've entered in professional spaces that require explanation and things, oftentimes that delay that we experience as gestalt processors, I'll come to the answer the next day, a week later, sometimes a year later. I'm going to have to write it down because then something else will come and knock it out. And so the AutSide, Substack is where I store these things. And sometimes they get quite long. And sometimes it's not just one thing. And so, when the future won't hold turned out to be a number of pieces. Priced out of personhood turned out to be a number of pieces. The WH questions, right? There are multiple types of questions, so there are multiple answers to those scenarios. And so there's a lot of talk around me at the moment because of all of the problems in America and the world. How do you feel? How do you feel today? Well, I feel this and that. I don't know. I kind of say in the moment how I'm feeling in one sentence. And so then the default becomes, oh, well, if you're feeling, sounds like you're feeling depressed, Jamie, so you should go to therapy and you'll feel better. And so I thought about that in my own therapeutic experience and, going to therapy as a gestalt processor, as an autistic person, as a person with sensory sensitivities and from a different worldview and culture and all of that kind of stuff. And so working through all of those things in my mind, storing scripts, I started to think about all of the times that I've been in therapeutic environments and I was read wrong, right? And so part of my problem is that I'm so obviously tall and that kind of thing. And I don't come from a culture that is known in America. Westies are a minority within the UK. And so anytime you come from a kind of marginalised community, anytime you come from a community that has been defined, by someone else, there is caricature. Oh, well, Jamie, you can't be Scottish. You don't sound like, Ewan McGregor. You don't sound like Sean Connery. Well, of course I don't. I'm not from Edinburgh. I'm not from, Paisley or any place like that. And so naturally, I'm not going to sound like that. I'm from, my parents had nothing to do with those two gentlemen. So I don't look like them and all of these kinds of things. I'm just, it's kind of the same thing of like, oh, you're from America, but you don't sound like the people in Texas or Boston or New York, or whatever. And people sound how they sound and people are making judgments. And so part of what I've been processing is this wrong reading, right? I read you, Jamie, as this or whatever. And more often than not, it's wrong, right? And the problem becomes when you enter into therapy, you don't recognize that you're walking into a legal regime. myself as a teacher in California, I am a mandated reporter. When I hear certain phrases, there are things I must do. And if I didn't do them, I will lose my job. I may even lose my liberty. I may be arrested. I may be sued, all of this kind of stuff. And so you walk in your first visit in therapy and a very benign seeming question. How do you feel today? How do you feel right now? How do I answer that? Which now? Right? And I've written extensively about multiple nows and how they work. And I know it confuses people when I say this, but I'm old enough to remember the overhead projector in classrooms. And you have transparencies that you set down on the overhead projector and it projects on the screen. And, professor can write things or whatever. So that, imagine, that is one now. That is now. And then you take a pre-prepared transparency and you put that on top. And now you're seeing both nows. And then you put another, and then you put another. And pretty soon you cannot discern what's going on because it's all jumbled together. That's the best kind of approximation I can do for experiencing multiple nows now. And so the very simple question, how do you feel now? How do you feel right now? It's complicated, right? And even what happened, what happened inside, what happened outside, all of these kinds of things are complicated. I spoke in, the collapse of futurity, how complicated the answer is. Do you have any thoughts of harming yourself? And that's a very tricky question, because if your future has collapsed, it's not necessarily, I explained this, throughout the series of When the Future Won't Hold. It's not that, you're actively seeking to harm, but, if something happened, you might not protest. How would a professional respond to that, right? What kind of mandatory things must they do? And so it's very, very difficult, right? And it's not a matter of like trying on shoes. Myself, size 17, I cannot really buy things simply. So how do you shop for therapy, right? How do you know it's a good fit? And the paper that just released this week, when delay is a category error, we don't know when we show up in a therapeutic environment the philosophical underpinnings of the therapist. We don't know how they were trained. We don't know, what their belief system is. We don't know how they see autistic people. We don't know if they know about gestalt processing. We don't know that if we walk in there, and maybe we pre-screen them, are you comfortable working with autistic people? Oh yes, I'm very neurodiversity affirming, blah, blah, blah. I have a grand client base of neurodivergent people. Well, that's great. What about gestalt processors? What do you mean? What's that? Okay. On to the next place. Right. And so when you first walk in, right, when you first walk in, that trial, you're in a script garden. You're at stage 0. You don't have questions. You don't have answers. How do you interrogate this, right? How do you navigate this? So what brings you in today? I don't know. I don't know how I'm feeling. I don't know why I'm feeling it. I have a certain amount of dread for the future, and I have a certain amount of this and that. Oh, Jamie, you must be severely depressed. So here's some medicines. But no, right? I've done that. It's not worked. It's not what's wrong. That's not where I'm going. And so you have all of these kinds of problems. And when you refuse medicines, then that makes you defiant. And, I don't want to discount anybody's taking of medicines. I take medicines myself. I think you kind of see the point. And so the series is called The Wrong Reader, right? For a reason, because people will default to the level of their education. And if they've never heard of you, if they've never heard of people like you, then there is a problem, right? And so in this series, I'm talking about that initial visit. I'm talking about, when you have all of this bodily somatic memory and you're very reactive and they don't know what to make of that. I'm talking about CBT and, colored by my own journey through, how can you have a cognitive behavioral therapy when the cognition that the CBT was framed on and built from is not yours. Right? CBT was not founded in gestalt cognition. It was founded in a different cognition. And so gestalt works differently, right? We autistics, late identified or early identified who have kind of a traumatic experience with behaviorism, CBT is just not going to work. It's going to create too many triggers. And so I'm dealing with that as well. I'm dealing with the therapeutic gaze where, my mannerisms, my excitability, my flappy hands, my inability to sit still. How is the therapist viewing this? Right? For me, it's perfectly normal. This is how I am. But how do they interpret that? And so we talk about the wrong reader in that standpoint. I talk very frankly about my own journey and how when it all goes wrong and you're a gestalt processor and you're in the moment and you have no script, then what? What do you do? And so this is kind of a content warning for the series. It is frank. It is honest. It is starting again. And I think, perhaps the things that are happening in the world right now are causing me to be more kind of poetic and lyrical and stuff and how I'm processing stuff. But I'm starting from the whole of it. And for me, the whole of it right now is poetic. And I think, rather than, you go and find some research on what does the research say. And so this will tend to be auto theory, it tend to be autoethnography written from inside the weather system, mine. But I think enough people will get it. They'll understand it. And so I'm leaving this here for you to introduce the series. And hopefully it will resonate. Once again, the Google Notebook is crap when it comes to these kinds of sensitive things. So once again, in this series, there will be no summaries. But I will take the time to narrate the poem at least. And so you have that. I hope you liked how it worked out on the others. I've gotten some good feedback about that. It takes time. I cannot do like the whole thing in one go on one day. The most I can get through is a couple. And because I write so far ahead, the end of the series is 3 weeks ahead of now. But that gives me time to get it all done. Like I do 2, maybe 3 at the most. It's not a matter of time. It's a matter of the weight of it. It's a matter of the stepping back into the now. And, just as, over at Sensual Residue, there is a kind of a fun element to that here in this series and kind of stepping back in and you're stepping into the weather system of that moment, in this case, 1994. But it's just as fresh. It's just as raw, just as real, just as panic-inducing, just as terrifying. And so you kind of do a lot of it, quite frankly. But there's enough going on for me professionally and my family and so on that these things came to mind. And that's how it often works for me, that, I have these pressures, I have these anxieties, I have this kind of verbal processing constipation and explosion, and there it is, the whole of it. And then I have to sit and I have to kind of say, oh, what just happened? And get to a keyboard or yell at my mobile and use a voice notes and just get it out. And then I can, once the whole of it is out, and I can start seeing what this is and play with it and stuff. I don't know that I can teach, my writing method to anybody. But that's kind of how it works for me. And there are plenty of autistic people online that use digital tools to help them in this effort. And for me, I found that it's more of a hindrance because just like I'm finding with the Google stuff, there are guardrails, there are things it does not want to do. There are restrictions, there are triggers internally that they just get in the way, and my brief foray into Claude, when somebody said, oh, you have to check out Claude, the problem with Claude and with large language models in general is that, yes, they've scraped all of this, from Reddit and, the canon of English literature and all that kind of stuff. But there are very few Gestalt processors writing, and there are very few pieces to scrape that reflect a Gestalt experience. And so, no, LLMs do not know how to interact with Gestalt processors. It's just, I was so frustrated by Claude after about 10 minutes. Like, no, I just bin this thing. I don't need it. And so I know other people really rely on it, and that's great, but not me. I'm sorry. I don't have no time for that. But here in this current series, you'll feel, I think, the frustration, you'll feel the angst and so on. And so I want to leave this ahead of time as a content warning to say, this is kind of heavy, but there is serious jeopardy in engaging in a therapeutic environment that is extractive now. And because of these certain phrases and liabilities and so on, you must know what you're getting into. And so part of this is also, it's for me, it's for my kids, but it can be a script garden for you if this is something you need. And I never discount therapy. I've been in therapy pretty much my whole life, off and on. But I need the scripts, and maybe you do too. So hopefully these are helpful. On the final note, if you're in the English-speaking world, private capital has absolutely gobbled up therapy and doctors' offices and clinics and stuff. And so you never quite know if the therapist is genuinely recommending something, a treatment schedule, a drug, a frequency of visits or whatever, because it's the best practice, the best thing for you. Or if because the screen in front of them has been programmed by the private equity firm to say, this is how we activate the funnel to get the maximum amount of value and revenue out of this particular patient. We don't know that. And I don't think therapy, the receptionist and the therapist are going to want to disclose that to you. But, you can you can search Google and say, for this practice, who is the owner, who is the business owner and stuff. And with a little bit of detective work, you can find the corporate structure of that and determine whether or not, it's private equity held. And more often than not, these days they are. And that has implications for care. And I think, one of the sheer terrors of my life is when I've encountered these funnels, and I use that term very specifically, where the language for them, the other side, is scripted and is designed to get you into kind of an agreeable mindset, to say the right things, and to walk you down a sales path that ends with not only the maximum extraction in the moment, but you as a continued customer. And so I'm very distrustful of them, and I dislike them thoroughly. So there's a bit of that writing in, kind of, I don't want to say anti-capitalist, but it kind of is, where therapy should just be you and a therapist and you working out your things, not, how do you plug in as an input into this gigantic, capitalist scheme and so on. Well, it's a very heavy series, but it's very laden with scripts that can be helpful, right? And to kind of come full circle on where we started, I'm writing this for me. I'm writing this because I may need something like this. And the almost 2,000 pieces now on AutSide, they're my script garden. They are, I may need this someday. And sometimes I revisit them and I think, okay, I've read that now and it's 2 years later and so much has changed. And I may leave a note to myself, an update, and I'll date it. Because I want to keep the original thought preserved, the original script preserved as is, and then move on from there. So I'm glad you enjoy them. But I'm not here creating content. I'm not here generating clicks and the revenue and all of that kind of stuff. There's no business behind me. It's just Jamie. And, that's what I do. I write this whole video thing and podcast with Kathy and, appearances on other podcasts is a brand new thing for me, and it's terrifying. And I cannot say that any more plain. These videos are terrifying to me. These appearances are terrifying. It's not natural. It's not normal for me. I don't do it. But what you're hearing right now is me kind of in the same way I would be rambling at my voice memo in my phone. And so I don't edit these. I don't cut these up. I just publish them as is, and leave them again for myself. Right. So 2 years from now, I may be looking for something, and then I see, oh, there's a series. Let me watch this video and see what I was on about. And that's why they're helpful to me. Hopefully they're helpful to you. So with that, again, I thank you immensely. For those of you that have chosen to subscribe, oh my gosh, I cannot thank you enough. There have been some weeks where your subscriptions paid for groceries, and that's not hyperbole. This recording setup was paid for by subscriptions. So thank you. Thank you very much for your support and your continued support. And I wish you a good day.